The moment that made the world hold its breath. The lights in the theater dimmed, and the audience waited for the charity gala to begin. It was one of Hollywood's most elegant nights, filled with laughter, cameras, and quiet tension hidden behind polite smiles. Everyone knew who they were there to see: Keanu Reeves, the man who rarely appeared at public events unless it truly meant something. But what caught people's attention that night wasn't just him. It was who sat beside him: Alexandra Grant, graceful and calm as ever, her hand resting quietly on her lap. She wore no diamonds, no glitter, just a soft silver dress that shimmered under the lights. Then, a few minutes later, a murmur spread through the crowd as Sandra Bullock entered the hall. It had been years since she and Keanu were seen together in public. Their friendship was one of the most whispered about bonds in Hollywood, pure, mysterious, and filled with rumors of what might have been. Alexandra noticed the shift in the room, but instead of shrinking, she smiled, a small, peaceful smile that said more than words could. Keanu turned his head slightly and met her eyes. She nodded, and he understood. There was no jealousy, no tension, only quiet strength. The event began, and soon the host called Sandra on stage to speak about the charity they both supported. Her voice was warm, filled with her usual humor, but when she glanced toward Keanu and Alexandra, something in her softened. "We all meet people who remind us what kindness really looks like," Sandra said, her eyes glistening. "And tonight, I want to thank someone who has shown me that love, real love, doesn't compete. It completes." The room went silent. Cameras turned toward Alexandra, who was watching gently, her eyes steady. Sandra smiled faintly and said, "Alexandra, you've given peace to a man who has given peace to so many of us. Thank you for that." For a moment, even the air felt still. Keanu blinked slowly, his eyes meeting Sandra's across the room, a connection full of respect and history. And then he turned to Alexandra, who, instead of crying, simply reached for his hand and whispered, "It's okay." Her words were quiet, but the look in her eyes said everything. She wasn't afraid of his past. She honored it. She wasn't trying to replace anything that came before her. She was building something new on top of it. The audience began to clap, softly at first, then louder, until the whole hall filled with sound. But to Keanu, the only thing that mattered in that moment was the calm presence beside him. The woman who didn't need to fight for attention, because her love was built on peace. And that night, when Keanu's eyes met Sandra's and Alexandra smiled instead of crying, the world realized that love doesn't always have to be loud to be powerful. Sometimes, it's the quietest moments that change everything. The conversation no one saw. The applause still echoed in the hallway. As people began leaving the gala, flashes from cameras lit up the lobby. But Keanu and Alexandra slipped away quietly through the side corridor, hoping to avoid the crowd. Alexandra walked beside him, calm and composed, though her heart still felt the weight of Sandra's words. Once they were outside, Keanu looked at her carefully. "You sure you're okay?" he asked softly. She smiled faintly. "I'm fine." What she said, it was beautiful. He nodded, though there was something in his eyes, a mix of emotion and memory. "Yeah, it was." Before he could say more, Sandra appeared at the door behind them. She looked a little nervous, holding a small envelope in her hand. "Alexandra," she said gently, "could we talk?" "Just for a minute." Keanu hesitated, but Alexandra touched his arm. "It's all right," she said quietly. He gave her a small nod and walked toward the car, giving them space. Sandra approached slowly, her voice low. "I hope you didn't think what I said was too much." Alexandra shook her head. "No, it was honest, and it meant something." For a long moment, both women stood there, quiet, the soft hum of the city filling the silence. Then Sandra sighed and said, "You know, when I first met Keanu, he was different, kind but distant, always giving, never asking for anything back. I tried to understand him, but he carried something no one could fix." Alexandra listened carefully, her expression kind. "Pain," Sandra nodded. "Yes, and guilt. He used to think happiness was something that belonged to other people. And then you came along, and suddenly, he started smiling differently. He started breathing again." Alexandra lowered her eyes, touched by the sincerity in Sandra's voice. I didn't do anything special, she whispered. I just listened. I let him be who he is. Sandra smiled sadly. That's what makes it special. She hesitated before handing Alexandra the envelope. I wasn't sure if I should give you this, but he wrote it years ago. It's not a love letter, not in the usual way. It's something he wrote after we finished filming Speed. He never sent it. I found it in an old box. Alexandra frowned slightly, her hands trembling as she took it. Why are you giving this to me? Because it's a part of him, Sandra said softly. And I think you're the only one who'll understand what it means. Before Alexandra could respond, Sandra smiled faintly. Take care of him. He deserves peace, and I think you're the only one who can give it. When Alexandra returned to the car, Keanu noticed the envelope in her hand. What's that? He asked. She smiled, trying to keep her voice steady. Something from your past. He looked puzzled but didn't press her. Later that night, when he fell asleep, Alexandra sat by the window, slowly opening the envelope. Inside was a single page, written in Keanu's careful handwriting. To the person I'll one day trust enough to see me when I'm not acting. I hope you know. Peace isn't quiet. It's someone who listens without trying to fix you. Tears slipped down her cheek. He had written those words long before they met, and yet, somehow, it felt like they were meant for her. Asterisk the letter that felt like fatigue. Next morning, soft sunlight spilled across the living room floor. Keanu was sitting by the window, reading, his expression calm and thoughtful. Alexandra walked in quietly, holding a cup of tea and the folded letter in her hand. She had barely slept, her mind replaying Sandra's voice and the words written years before. Keanu looked up with a gentle smile. You were awake early? Yeah, she said softly. I was thinking. He noticed the paper in her hand. Is that what she gave you last night? She nodded, her voice trembling slightly. Yes, and I think you should read it. He looked uncertain. What is it? A letter, she whispered. Something you wrote a long time ago. His eyebrows furrowed. I wrote. She handed it to him carefully. Sandra found it. From years ago. She thought I should give it to you. Keanu unfolded the page slowly. His eyes scanned the first few lines, and for a moment, his breath caught. He remembered the night he had written it, alone in his apartment, after another sleepless evening during filming. He had been thinking about connection, about the kind of love that doesn't demand or take, only understands. As he read the words again, something inside him stirred. When he reached the final line, peace isn't quiet. It's someone who listens without trying to fix you. His hands trembled slightly. He looked up at Alexandra, and their eyes met. I don't remember ever giving this to anyone, he said quietly. You didn't, she replied. It waited for me. Keanu exhaled slowly, as if a lifetime of emotion was sitting in his chest. It's strange, he said. Back then, I wrote it thinking I'd never find someone who could make sense of me. But you did, without ever trying to. Alexandra smiled faintly. Maybe that's what love is. Finding someone who doesn't need to fix what was never broken. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle but firm. You know, he said softly, people think peace is silence, but peace is you sitting beside me. It's this us. For a moment, there was only stillness between them, not empty, but full, like a heartbeat that didn't need words. Then the phone rang. The sound shattered the quiet. Keanu frowned and picked it up. It was his manager, voice tense and worried. Keanu, there's something you should know. An old video surfaced from years ago. It's being shared everywhere. Keanu's expression darkened. What kind of video? Someone's using it to twist your past. It's bad. And they're dragging Alexandra into it, too. Alexandra's heart dropped. What's happening? She asked softly. He hung up, his jaw tight. Someone's trying to stir trouble again. But this time, I won't hide. He looked back at her, determination in his eyes. You gave me peace, he said. Now it's my turn to protect it. She wanted to speak, but her throat closed. All she could do was nod. Outside, the world was already waking up to the headlines. KeanuReeves' private video resurfaces. Alexandra Grant responds with silence. But inside their home, the silence wasn't fear. It was unity, and it was about to be tested. The storm and her silence be noon. The headlines had spread everywhere. News channels, gossip sites, And even social media pages were filled with clips and photos that made no sense without context. An old video of Keanu, taken decades ago, was now being twisted into something ugly, something that tried to erase his kindness and turn his silence into guilt. Keanu sat in front of the television, watching the chaos unfold. Alexandra stood behind him, her heart pounding. The world had always seen him as calm and gentle, but now they were painting him as something else entirely. He turned off the TV and leaned back in his chair. "I should have expected this," he said quietly. "No," Alexandra replied softly. "No one deserves to be torn apart for old ghosts." He smiled faintly. "The internet loves ghosts. They feed on them," but she could see the pain in his eyes. Even after years of losing so much, friends, family, love, this still hurt. Not because of the lies, but because of how easily people believed them. By evening, the noise grew louder. Journalists were waiting outside their gate, shouting questions, holding cameras high. Every headline twisted the same false narrative, and then they began mentioning Alexandra's name. The artist behind the silence, they called her. "Why won't she speak?" Keanu looked at her. "Maybe you should say something," he said, "before they decide what your silence means." She shook her head. "If I speak now, I'll sound like I'm defending myself. And love doesn't need defense." He sighed. "You'll get hurt." She smiled softly. "So will you. But we've both survived worse." The next morning, as photographers gathered outside, Alexandra walked out onto the porch. Flashes exploded instantly, people shouting her name, asking if she was ashamed, if she regretted standing by him. She didn't flinch. She didn't answer. She simply smiled, a calm, quiet smile that confused everyone. One journalist called out, "Why aren't you saying anything?" Alexandra paused and looked at them with kind eyes. "Because peace doesn't shout," she said simply, and then she went back inside. The moment was caught on camera. Within hours, her quiet reply began spreading online. "Peace doesn't shout." People started replaying the clip, editing it over soft music, calling it the most powerful silence in Hollywood. Keanu watched the videos in disbelief. "You turned their noise into calm," he whispered. Alexandra shrugged gently. "I didn't mean to. I just didn't want them to see fear." He touched her hand, his voice low and full of gratitude. "You remind me what strength looks like." That evening, Sandra Bullock called. Her voice was soft but emotional. "I saw the video," she said. "And Alexandra, you just changed everything. People are finally seeing the truth, not the one the media creates, the one you live." Alexandra smiled faintly. "I didn't do it for them. I did it for him." And as the world argued online about who was right and who was wrong, the two of them sat quietly together, their hands intertwined, saying nothing, because in that silence, the one the world tried to break, they had already won. When truth finally spoketh next morning, the sun rose over a restless world. Headlines still argued, social feeds still boiled, but something had shifted. Alexandra's calm response, "Peace doesn't shout," had become a whisper spreading through millions of hearts. People began asking themselves why silence could feel stronger than rage. Keanu watched from the living room, still wearing his quiet smile, but his eyes told a different story. Behind that calm, he was deciding something. He'd been silent long enough. The world could twist his kindness into weakness, but it couldn't erase truth. He turned to Alexandra, who was preparing tea. "I'm going to speak," he said simply. She froze. "Are you sure?" "Yes," he said. "Not to fight them, to free both of us." She walked closer, her voice soft. "Then speak with love, not defense." He nodded. Always, later that day, Keanu appeared at a small press event for the charity they both supported. No red carpet, no crowd of flashing lights, just a handful of reporters waiting for answers. He stepped to the microphone wearing a black shirt and that familiar gentle expression the world had always loved. But this time, there was something new, quiet fire in his eyes. "I've lived long enough to know," he began softly, "that silence is often misunderstood. Sometimes people think silence means guilt. Other times, they think it means weakness. But for me, silence has always meant peace, the peace to think, to feel, to forgive." The room grew still, The video that's been spreading," he continued, "was from a time in my life when I was lost, when I didn't know how to live with pain. I said things in private that weren't meant for fame. They weren't cruel, but they were raw, and someone thought that pain was worth selling." He paused and looked directly into the cameras. "I'm not ashamed of my past. Pain made me kinder. It made me listen. And if the world wants to see who I am now, they should look at the woman who taught me what peace really means." His voice softened. "Alexandra Grant." For a moment, the room went silent again. Flashes stopped. Even the reporters lowered their cameras. "She didn't defend herself," Keanu said, "because she didn't need to. She reminded me that truth doesn't yell to be heard. Sometimes it just stands quietly and waits for the noise to fade." When he finished, no one clapped. They just sat there, moved, unsure what to say. Later that evening, as they walked home hand in hand, Alexandra looked up at him. "You didn't have to mention me," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "I did, because peace deserves a name." Her eyes filled with tears. "You always know what to say." "Not always," he said softly. "But when it's about you, the words come easy." That night, clips of his speech spread faster than any rumor ever could. Millions watched, thousands commented, and for once, the internet wasn't angry. It was quiet, respectful, healing. Sandra sent a message that read simply, "You did it. Both of you." And somewhere between the noise of fame and the silence of truth, love had finally spoken, softly, clearly, and forever. The calm after every storm weeks passed, and the noise faded like rain after thunder. The world had moved on, but something beautiful remained. Everywhere online, people were still quoting Alexandra's words, "Peace doesn't shout." Teachers shared it in classrooms, artists painted it on walls, and somewhere deep in people's hearts, the quiet dignity of her silence had become a reminder that strength doesn't always roar. Keanu and Alexandra spent those weeks away from cameras, walking by the ocean, living simply. They cooked together, read poetry, and talked about everything except fame. He often caught her painting in the sunlight, her gray hair glowing like silver fire. And he thought to himself, this is what peace looks like. One evening, Sandra called. "The charity wants both of you to come to the next gala," she said warmly. "Not for a show, not for headlines, just to honor what your story did for people." Alexandra hesitated, but Keanu smiled. "Let's go. This time, we walk in together." When they arrived, the room filled with soft applause. Not loud, not forced, gentle and real. People stood, not because they were celebrities, but because they had shown the world that love, kindness, and truth still mattered. Sandra was there too, radiant and tearful. She hugged Alexandra first. "You kept him steady," she whispered. Alexandra smiled softly. "He taught me how." On stage, Keanu was handed the microphone again. He looked around the quiet hall and said, "Months ago, people thought our silence meant defeat. But sometimes silence is the beginning of healing. Alexandra and I didn't fight back with anger. We waited, we listened, and we trusted that love would speak when it was ready. And it did." The audience sat in absolute stillness. Even the lights seemed softer. He turned to Alexandra, his voice lowering so only those closest could hear. "You're my calm in every storm," he whispered. She squeezed his hand. "And you're the reason I still believe peace can survive in this world." A few minutes later, Sandra joined them on stage. The three of them stood side by side, not as old rumors, not as a love triangle the world once speculated about, but as proof that compassion could exist even between hearts that had shared pain. The crowd rose to its feet. Applause filled the air, slow, warm, endless. Keanu looked at Alexandra, his eyes glistening. "You see," he murmured. "They understand now." She smiled. "They always would. They just needed to listen." When the event ended, the three of them stepped outside. The night air was cool, the city lights flickering like stars. Alexandra looked up at the sky and whispered, "Peace doesn't shout." Keanu wrapped his arm around her. "No," he said softly. "It just stays." And in that quiet moment, beneath the glow of the world that once tried to break them, they stood together, not as headlines or stories, but as two souls who had turned chaos into calm and pain into peace. Because sometimes, The loudest love is the one that chooses silence, and the strongest hearts are the ones that forgive.